why the expectation, we call the miraculous redemption, became so dominant. We saw that there's two possibilities, two scenarios in the prophets: the what we call the natural redemption, and developmental historical process, human participation, human doing things, and the, so to speak, divine intervention of a miraculous, all at once, all perfect, all complete. And we spoke about how the different reasons for the expectation of the miraculous, but many rabbis that we saw of Kalashir, of Gutmach, we read that it is wrong to believe that redemption will come as a sudden revelation of God from heaven, calling upon his people to leave the diaspora. To our great misfortune, Rav Gutmacher writes, there are many who mistakenly believe that they will sit in the comfort of their homes when suddenly a voice from heaven will proclaim final redemption, but it will not be so. So we talked about that, and we started to bring sources of the what we call the natural redemption, which requires human participation and efforts. So the second source on the sheet in front of you. Those who have the sheets from last week, or if not, there's more. But it's good to keep them back each week till we finish, and then you can keep them. So this is from the Ramban, his Nachmanides, his commentary to Shir Shirim, Song of Songs. He writes here, the future redemption will come in a natural way. So again, Rav Kalish, Rav Gutmacher, we could say is more modern. This is like 200 years ago, or the 1800s.
Who said it will come in a more natural way?
They said, we saw already Rav Kalish, Rav Gutmacher, that we just read, right? It's wrong to believe that redemption will come in this, miraculous way. We have to do, and that was in the 1800s. There are others after, we'll see more. But now we're going backwards, so to speak. Right, Rav Kalish wrote, redemption will come about through an awakening of well-despised Gentile leaders and governments viewing favorably the return of Jews to the Holy Land. That we read right a few weeks ago. In a natural way, through but call it the Balfour Declaration. Where'd they get that from? They made that up. So now we're going backwards, so to speak, in the sources that preceded him. This is from the 1300s, actually the 1200s, the Ramban. In the 1200s, he writes, what you see in front of you, with the permission of the kings of the nations, and with their help, the Jews will go to Eretz Yisrael. And he brings on that a verse from Yeshayahu. Today the nations will bring you back. And he adds, and that kingdom that will be established when you come back again will continue and will not stop at all. And that'll be the final redemption, the final return. Where did he get that from? The Ramban. Actually, we'll see it maybe later, the Tanhuma, the same as one of the classic Midrashim. The Midrash Tanhuma on Parshat Shoftim, letter 9. It's divided into paragraphs, lettered paragraphs. Tet. It says there, I think in verse in Zechariah, that there'll be three, referring to some three returns. There'll be three returning back to Eretz Israel. You came out of Egypt, came back to the land of Israel. You returned after the 70-year Babylonian exile, and then come back to Eretz Israel. When you return the third time, it says there in the Midrash, Eino posek leolam, the same words that the Ramban is using. When you come back the third time, it doesn't stop. There's no end to that. That's it. You're here to stay. With people today, again, some people have questions. Maybe it's just an episode. Maybe you're just here temporarily, God forbid. Maybe just like before we came, we were exiled. So here the rabbis tell us, and there's other sources we'll see, but just for now, you see, it says now we're back the third time, the third and final time. There might be problems. Unfortunately, there's difficulties and challenges we'll speak about that their function also in this process.
Will this be the
There's
second
no
or the
going
third
back.
time?
No, I said this from Egypt, from the second temple. They came back after in Bavel, 7 years.
But we didn't have half the people back. After Egypt, we did. So maybe that's the first time you're saying.
No, the rabbi said, the Midrash says the examples there. The second time, and the third time, then it was in the future when the Midrash wrote this. But now, and also the Ramban says this for the future. When you come back the third time, with the help of the kings of the nations, etc., that will be the third and final coming back. Yes.
Israel has one of the most advanced militaries in the world, and we have nuclear weapons. Israel is more powerful. We don't have to worry. It's not nothing's going.
No, I wasn't worried, but I wasn't, not because of that though.
Bad is going to happen.
Because no, but the other enemies we have are also pretty well equipped. But that's not the reason for the guarantee of our success. There's a divine process, like there's three temples, there's three returns, the final return, and that is what guarantees we have to do our effort. You're right. We need the strong, the power that we'll get to. That's the next source I wanted to get to elaborate on this topic of what's called in Hebrew hishtadlut v'bitachon. What does that mean? Hishtadlut?
Hishtadlut, bitachon.
Hishtadlut.
What was the second?
Bitachon.
Bitachon, like trying.
Bitachon is trust,
like a
faith
tempting.
in God, so to speak, relying on Him,
True,
and
true.
hishtadlut.
Trying to
Right.
be faithful.
No, there's two words. I'm saying it's two topics of hishtadlut and bitachon. Faith in God, and hishtadlut is human effort, human like attempts, human participation. That's the next source I want to get to, which is related to this topic of the natural redemption. Natural redemption is that which comes through, again, human being. It seems to be so, we're waiting for God. And how does it relate? Let's first see the source and then we'll discuss it. So you see this, in that second source, there's what's the underline, the Radak. The Radak is one of the classic commentators to the Tanakh, a biblical commentator of David Kimchi, also living in the, called the 13th century. If you in the Mikro Gdolot, in the books of the commentaries, the Torah, the Tanakh, with the commentaries, you have the Radak there, Rav David Kimchi. Look what he writes here. I wanted to maybe analyze this a little bit more in depth. On the verse we say every day in Tehillim 146, right after Ashrei, which is 145, right? We say, and then we say this verse: Al tivtechu bin divim. Don't put your faith, your trust in man, in philanthropers, in rich people, but rather in man. She'ein lo tshuva, for not unto man is salvation. And the Radak says, she'ein lo tshuva, there's no salvation to man. Like man, don't put your faith in man. He's not your savior. She'im lo birtzon hakel, if it is not in the will of God, ein biyad adam loshia chaveiro mitzarato. For if not the will of God, then your friend cannot save you from your troubles. So you might think, mistakenly, I want to be clear on these things, stopping in the middle here. You might think, therefore, you shouldn't help your friend because it's only in the hands of God. Your friend can't help you. But he says here that if it's not the will of God, all your friend's doings will not help you. So you might think, again, at this point, he goes on, Ki Lashem levado hatshuva, for only unto God is salvation. So again, put your faith in God, not in man. So it seems like the more you believe, the less you do, because you have to put your faith in God. He's the one that can save you, can help you, redeem you, and bring you to Israel individually, nationally. It's all up to God. And there were those that, again, this topic what I just mentioned, hishtadlut and bitachon, of faith and human efforts. It seems like they were mutually exclusive. The more you believe in God, the less you do, because the opposite. If you do, it shows you don't what? As if.
Well, in theory,
In theory.
you don't believe in God, but it's
Right.
just
Right.
the
In
opposite.
theory, it sounds like you don't believe in God. It'll help you. Why are you doing this? You don't believe that God can or let's put on this, what we're talking about. Don't come to Israel. When God wants, he'll bring you to Israel. Any attempt on your part shows a lack of belief.
But that's never
I'm
how
giving
it's
this,
worked.
again, I'm stopping in the middle here of the Radak purposely of what you might have thought. You're right. That's not the conclusion yet. So
But
don't
that's
get me
not the
wrong.
conclusion. That's never how it's worked in Torah. Not with the splitting
Right,
of the
I
sea.
agree with
Not
you.
with
Well, no,
not
you
with
should
Noah,
know.
not with Noah and the flood.
Oh, we'll get to that. You're right. Those are amazing examples I wanted to get to. But you should know that that's not how it was. This book of the rabbi in Europe, just testified to see you should know that those who feared the hand of God stood on their side. He talked about coming to Israel, etc. Stood on the side. This is during the Holocaust, before they came to Israel, before the state, and they refrained from sharing in the work. They stood by their age-old claim: it is preferable to sit and do nothing. There's a term in halachic term of sheva al taseh, sit back and do nothing. So they used this principle, so to speak. They got used to. We mentioned this learned helplessness. If those that were here remember those who were here before. The psychological term of learned helplessness. When you can't do, you get so used to an inability to facilitate whatever, to bring about what you want done, you stop even trying. Even though when it's possible to do, you don't even try. Again, I don't want to go back and repeat over that. That's what we talked about, right? They mentioned the Evan Ezra, the previous source, was the what we call learned help, the slave, the galut mentality. The Jews that left Egypt, they saw their masters chasing them, they froze. Why? You outnumber them. Like you said, you have an army, now you're millions. But they were the slaves, and this is the masters. You don't just like the Rambam. We wrote in the Rambam, right? His Guide for the Perplexed. How if a slave doesn't just wash his hands to become a free man. We mentioned the example right from before. Again, it's hard to repeat everything. We don't have time to do all that again. But there's this slave mentality. It's not an IQ. It's not a matter of who has the strength and the power. Now you can fight. That's the whole thing of this learned helplessness. You become so, the option of a natural redemption, of a possibility to facilitate, to work, to do it yourself became so impossible, so remote, that it became forgotten that we were just waiting for God to bring it about. They sit back and do nothing. In the meantime, the initiators, the secular, so to speak, began building our land, so may it continue, while the Orthodox Jews and the Tzaddikim stood aloof. And he says, you're right, what he says, what you were all thinking. It is clear that he who prepares before the Shabbat will eat on Shabbat. That's also halachic, but the principle that you have to, those who prepare will eat. In other words, if you don't eat, you don't prepare, you won't have what to eat. And since the Orthodox did not toil, they have absolutely no influence in the land. And he goes over very stronger things later, but he writes about this throughout the whole book, that this concept of we have to wait for God. The more you believe, the more you wait, the more you believe in God and you pray. But how dare you to pick up your hands and do what needs to be done? That's an act of heresy. Because what, you don't believe that God can bring you back? But let's see it inside. I'll agree with what you're saying. Let's see it inside the Radak, because it's amazing the way he prints it. So it sounds like at this point that only with God's help, only unto God is salvation. But then these next few words that I emphasized. V'hu yisovavena al yedei bnei adam. What does that mean? Hu yisovavena, yisovev. He will turn it about through man. Oh, that's the catch. So again, it's from God. But he brings it about how?
From the hand of man.
Through human agents, through man, through your participation. That's not heresy. That's the way God works. Again, there are miracles that God sets aside the laws of nature. You participate. He doesn't need all that. He can do it. Again, of course he can do miracles, and there are miracles. But we're talking about the natural redemption.
But even then, he always is. Can you give me one time that's been done without the hand of a human being involved? There's always a hand. Whether it's Moses raising his hand, whether it's somebody lighting the Hanukkah lights,
Well, the 10 plagues,
whether it's
we're beyond what Moshe
yeah,
did.
exactly.
It
No,
wasn't
for sure,
just-
the 10 plagues. Even the 10 plagues, Moses went and to Pharaoh and said that these.
Not all of them. Some of them he gave them warning. Some of them, every third one, he didn't the warning. But even then, it wasn't his doing. He went.
It wasn't
like
his
this.
doing, but his hand was involved. Is what I'm saying,
you're
for
right.
Sure.
So but that we call miracles. Those are more revealed miracles. It doesn't go by the laws of nature. The laws of nature don't have the light, the laws of conservation of energy. You have a light it's an energy oil that's supposed to last for 1 day. It goes for 8 days.
They have to, or it wouldn't happen. It's bits that are, I'd say, so the secrets of the laws of nature.
You're saying that's the key. You need like the human touch to activate.
I'm saying I've even learned that, like, let's say even when the sea split, that it wasn't that suddenly happened. It was that when Akadosh Baruch Hu created the universe, he built into nature the concept that if this guy Moshe ends up standing here at this point in time, this is what water will do under these circumstances.
So that's the whole question of how you
On
define
the
miracles.
sixth
Miracles,
day,
yeah,
right
you're
before.
right, you're right. So miracles, you're right. The whole definition of what is miracles. But the point is here that what we call, before getting the depth of, like the Ramban says at the end of Parshat Bo, how it's everything is the opposite. He goes the other extreme. He says everything is a miracle. Everything of nature, everything of time takes place. It's all miraculous. It's all, we usually participate, so it happens over and over again. So we call that nature.
I could simultaneously
The miracles
agree
that
with
repeat themselves, we call that nature. But it's all from that. So you're saying the other degree, but it's all, you're right. It's all the same. It's all from one source.
Well,
But
that could be
there's different-
simultaneously both true.
Yeah,
They don't
but
contradict
again,
each
the
other.
usual definitions, understanding on the surface is what goes not according to the laws of nature, not a function of time. It's complete all at once, like there's an opening of the gates of heaven, and the goal it achieves itself is revealed right away, as opposed to the natural, which is the Maharal explains, what we call a developmental process in time. It develops and goes with laws and nature and in participation. But that's what he's saying
with
here.
all due respect, I have to disagree with that, because at least as the term nature is used in English, it's often used to somehow engender what occurs without divine assistance, whereas what's occurring with divine assistance. Whereas in Judaism, we believe that it's all occurring with divine assistance. So I therefore would object to the use of the term that somehow that nature is a separate thing from divine.
It's not a separate thing.
But in
You know
English,
the
that's
famous,
how we're
you know
using
the famous gematria of Hateva, right? Hateva is like the word for nature, right?
Uh-huh.
And that's
Okay.
the gematria of Elohim, God's name, Elohim. It's not mine, that's the Arizal. It's 86, I believe. It should be 70, 79, 81, 86. And this is also 86, the name of God. But, so you're right, but not that God is nature, not Spinoza. It's like what they call it, not pantheism, but panentheism. That God is revealed in nature, God is behind nature. So I agree with what you're saying. But again, there are terms that we call natural and miraculous. That's the whole discussion here. Is it something that all of a sudden is complete right away? Or it goes through stages of developmental process, of stages. That's a different reality in history. Everything is complete. All the Jews in Israel, right away, on a magic carpet, the Beit HaMikdash, everything is perfect and complete? Or is it a process that takes over years and years and years and stages that we'll see, that we spoke about? It's two different things. You're right, though, that's exactly what I want to get to, that it's the same God that is bringing about, that does the miraculous, is the same God that's behind the forces of nature. That's exactly what he says here. That's what Rav Druckmann brings down from the two prototypes of these redemptions, let's call it, of guidance of God. We'll leave Egypt, what do we say, the Ten Commandments? Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the God that took you out of Egypt. Anochi. Also, there's a verse that the Rabbi say is the hint to the time of Purim and the hidden hand, face of God in the book of Dvarim. Anochi haster astir, I will hide my face in those days. So there's the God that's the hidden face. He's not that he's gone. He's there, but the face is, so to speak, hidden. You don't see it. The other face is you see it. Anochi Hashem, that took you out of Egypt, the 10 plagues and the splitting of the Red Sea. There you see more of the hand of God. The other way is the hidden face. But Rav Druckmann point out, it's both of them say the Anochi. It's both the eye. It's the same eye that reveals myself in the natural through history, and the same God, it's the same eye that is behind when I reveal itself clearly and majestically and supernaturally. But you're right, it's the same Anochi. But that's what the Radak is saying here.
The whole world is filled with his glory.
Okay. But again, it's not so easy to see. Again, people were waiting. I mean, the reality was such, until this day, usually I could bring you articles and others, which you call the other opinions, that see that we have to wait for God. There's a rabbi, the rabbi of this, the author of this book. I guess I can say it. It's in the book. It's not something hidden. The Munkacher Rebbe, Rav Elazar, right? He was a Munkach Hasid, Rav Teichtal, the author of this book. And he writes explicitly, we have to wait for miracles. You're not allowed to come. The redemption is not your choice or whatever. The exile is not your choice, and you have to wait for God to bring you back. So we're saying, I don't want to jump the gun, but since you asked it, in other words, yes, again, it's true. It's all free. You have to wait for God. But who's the one that's bringing us back? Who is indeed that opened up the gates and letting us come back? That means moving Jews back to Israel, the land giving its fruits again. That is from God. But he says explicitly, not according to you, he says we have to wait for miracles. He also agrees that nature is from God, but he says no, we have to wait for miracles. And he writes his whole book, not against his Rebbe. He writes that if his Rebbe was alive today, and it's not easy for a Hasid. In other words, you didn't remember, you never read the book, you haven't finished it. He says,
So right now, there's somebody in the world who's getting up to make Aliyah. Is not the fact that they even woke up this morning, let alone that they're going to make Aliyah today, is that not a miracle?
yes.
So how could he be so blind?
I must confess the truth and declare my sin. I too despise the rebuilding of the land. Rav Teichtal writes, because I heard unqualified statements made by many Orthodox Jews, which became firmly implanted in my heart. We have to wait. We have to wait for redemption. We have to wait for God. I did not concern myself with this matter. I was learning, writing, teaching, etc. As a big rabbi. I only delved into this law, this halacha, after we suffered afflictions. Right? He was hiding out in Budapest later, running away from the Nazis. And then I saw that all those that opposed this movement were mistaken. And I admit that which I previously told you was mistaken. And he goes on and talks about how the origins of hatred towards the Zionists. Anyone who attempted to go to Israel to do whatever, you're a Zionist, you're an abhorrence, you hate you, God is against you, whatever. It's this understanding. The whole book is to come to counter that misunderstanding, that we have to wait for God. It's simple to you is not so simple. Until this day, you should know. When you go out to the big world, it's not so simple. Till this day. So let's get back to the sources. I want to continue and see what the sources, what Torah indeed says. How the Radak, how salvation only comes through Hashem. Only unto God is salvation, but he brings it about through man. Kamo, and he brings an example. And that's what I gave you more apropos, so that's what we're talking about. Kamosha sivev chuat galut bavel al yedei kores. Just like he turned about the redemption, returning from the exile, the Babylonian exile, through Koresh. This not only non-Jew, this king, this idol-worshipping king, God brought the redemption, the salvation, that second coming back to Eretz Israel, through Koresh. The Vilna Gaon, how do you say, Derech Hagav?
By the way.
Excuse me. The Vilna Gaon says the final redemption will be like the second temple. Within this, so to speak, again, like we just said, the human participation, the human kings, the Balfour Declaration, the Koresh Declaration, right? You know, the book of Koresh, the book in Ezra and Nehemiah, that the non-Jewish king said the Jews can come back and build the land. As opposed to the first redemption, right? The miraculous. We have God does miracles. When God does the plagues and whatever, he'll wipe out our enemies and bring us back to Israel and all be perfect right away. The Vilna Gaon says no, it'll be like the second way, like this time of course. But the Radak goes on even further. And he says, so too in the future. We've already witnessed one time that this came back in this natural way through Koresh, right? He said you have permission to come back. Balfour Declaration, the Jews can come back. And even then, how many came back? 42,000 came back of all the Jews, whatever. They're waiting for redemption. They're waiting for God. But God works through human agents. The famous story of the woman in the flood, right? The waters are getting higher and higher. There's a flood, and she goes up to the second story, and she hears a boat coming, and he says, get up, get out, and jump onto the boat, whatever, I can save you. She says, no, I'm a religious woman, a pious woman. I put my faith in God. Only into God is salvation, she says every day, this verse. So then the water gets higher and higher. A helicopter comes, grab on, quickly go up. This is your last chance. You can continue the story. She gets to heaven. God, I was so pious and believing in you. I put my faith in you, total trust. Why did this happen to you? Why did you do this? What does he answer?
I sent you two. Is it two groups of people?
I sent you a boat. I sent you a helicopter, etc. And it's not a joke. If you knew what was going on, I can bring you sources. It's not a joke, David. This is what's this perception, what's so obvious to you the other way, is not so clear. And you have to again. That's why we bent over backward to explain how this came about. What is this expectation of the miracle? That's what we mentioned, right? The Lord and help and all those sources.
Yeah.
Of remember the previous sheet of he himself in the beginning here, the historical introduction of why that concept became so dominant.
I know it's not a
they're waiting
joke
for
of saying
miracles.
that they became blinded, as it were, because often people believe. Often I've learned people believe what they want to believe. What's comfortable to.
It's also true. But why was it so comfortable? Who? I forget to understand. Why was the rabbis, scholars? His Rebbe was a giant. The Munkacher Rebbe, the Minchat Elazar, the response to literature. You're not talking about little people, small people that have some conceptions, whatever. How could it be? So that we discussed.
Well,
And we'll
more so,
discuss
because
it
the bigger
further.
they are, the more accustomed they are to thinking what they think and not having to consider options.
Okay, but that's what again. I don't want to get.
A
That's
humble
what we
farmer
discussed.
probably is more used to waking up in the morning
No, but you were there
and
for
saying,
those.
maybe I need to change. Maybe I need to consider changing something than some huge
Right, that's
landowner.
what also the Rambam
who-
writes.
who
People have
has a
their first
huge-
concept, and that usually remains what they stay with the rest of their life, whatever. But that's what we discussed, and we'll discuss. But I didn't want to become too, let's say, critical, so to speak, of others, but there is this other opinion and this viewpoint of we have to wait for like I said, the expectation of the miracle. Not what you're saying that it's all natural, it's all Hashem, or it's all miracle. There's a viewpoint, and we discussed at certain length of how this developed, this understanding developed. If the sources talk about two possibilities, and now what we're seeing, and as we go on, it'll become more and more, this question will come up. If it's so clear, if all these sources say the natural way and understanding the significance of why God brings it the natural way, what amazing, what it does for the world, how come the rabbi so-and-so doesn't know that? How come this and this one agrees? So the question will always come up. But yes, you should know that there are those that don't see what you're saying. It's not so clear. And we're learning it not just to convince you whatever, but to see what the Torah view is, to see this perspective, and to be able to be the leaders of this process, that it requires this understanding to continue the process. It becomes a difficult thing that this, you mentioned, seeing the redemption brings the redemption. The fact that Am Yisrael has in its midst people that understand and see what Hashem is doing, despite of the external phenomena that seem to be counter to that. In other words, seem to be secular, anti-religious, not good. This isn't what we expected. Having the body has the brain or the heart that knows what it's doing, then the rest of the body has the power to continue to go and to deal with all the difficulties and challenges that face it. Without that, if there aren't this mind people, these emunah people that we're studying, trying to be those understanders, let's call it, then the body loses its power. Post-Zionism, what are we doing here? What are we fighting for? What's it all for? We don't have the power to go on. When there's the true bigger ideal, as we'll see, doesn't fulfill the mind, then the body, even though it has the strength, it has the army, but all of a sudden there's no power, there's no, how do you say, energy to fades away. But that we'll talk about the stages. Yeah. No, behind you? 1 second. No, he behind you had one thing. And then,
Okay, so wouldn't almost every rabbi agree that it was Asur to build a state of Israel before the Balfour Declaration, and the only thing that gave permission was that nullification of the Bal, and that was the Balfour Declaration. So doesn't that kind of clarify?
No, I don't think so. Rav Kook wrote letters before the Balfour Declaration. No, he wrote letters.
Yeah, but you wrote letters about.
No, about
more Aliyah.
no, the Aliyah coming to Israel, Rav Kalisher, Rav Gutmacher, all these sources that we're bringing here were way before the Balfour Declaration.
They said it's mutter to actually have a state before the Balfour Declaration.
What do you mean a state?
People have been writing essays about this since like the 1700s at least.
What we're talking about is seeing the hand of God. Yes, God is bringing us back. He brought it about through the agreement of the nations. Did we depend on that? No. You want to talk about the 3 oaths you're referring to, that maybe it's forbidden. So that's another topic we'll have to get to. You're right. Some of the people, how do you say it, hung on that. That's their reason. We're not going. We have to wait for the 3 oaths, whatever. We can't go against the 3 oaths. But the other's right that's first of all, it's not. I don't want to get to all the other explanations of that. But yes, there were those that said that. But the truth is that wasn't the main opposition. Part of the opposition was mainly that it began with a human being and secular human beings, and this isn't the way God brings redemption. In other words, not only that it's not supernatural, the very fact that it's secular people, we can't participate in this. We would have liked to. There were those that said, wow, it's a good thing to come back to Israel. It's a commandment throughout history. We always had the commandment to be in Israel and to set up a king, right? One of the 3 mitzvot, when you come back to Israel, the first mitzvah, to set up a kingdom, appoint a king. However, they hesitated because look who's in charge, look who's running it. But the irony is, like you pointed out here, why were the people in charge, the secular people? Because the religious people, like you said, stood aloof, weren't sure, were waiting for their spirit or whatever, some other way of redemption that God will bring about. So that's what he says. The initiators were the secular Jews that weren't waiting for a God that would do it for them. They didn't believe in a God that would do it for them. The religious people were waiting for God. The secular said, what? We want to get up and build, and if you want to build, you have to go. The religious said, yeah, we also want to go. That's why we're waiting. We're waiting for God. So the irony is that the secular built it, and then they build a secular state, and then they wonder why they complain that it's a secular state. How can we participate? But he says because they were secular, in other words, because you didn't participate, that's what he goes on to say, that I don't think they'll ever be able to absolve themselves from the responsibility. I don't know if they will ever be able to vindicate themselves before the heavenly court for not participating in the movement to rebuild the land of Israel and for not heeding to come back. Had the God-fearing religious Jews been involved in this undertaking, our holy land would have been a completely different and more sanctified appearance. And he brings down the Ger Rebbe in page 349. The Ger Rebbe, it's not just Rav Teichtal here, not only, but the Ger Rebbe writes that Rebbe of Gur, 349. If many God-fearing Orthodox Jews gather in Eretz Yisrael, they will enhance the sanctity of the land. Wait, where's the where did he bring the Rebbe? Gur. The Rebbe Gur, no less than he's a profound genius, thousands. Where's the letter itself? He says how before that he went to speak, and this was in 1930, in 1940, he was killed in 1943. He says he went to speak, where he went to the shul.
43, you said?
He died. He was killed in 1943 on the way to the concentration. He didn't make it. He was killed on the train, whatever. But he said they gave him the place to speak, and he started to speak on Eretz Yisrael. They all yelled at him, "No, you're not supposed to go." He said that the Hungarian Jews were saved because they did not join movement to build the land of Israel. Why were they saved? They were the last ones to go. They were in Hungary. And he says, why? Because they were the anti-Zionists. They didn't go to Israel. That's why they were saved. It truly pains the heart to hear so many fools that the Holy One, blessed be, had mercy on the Jews of Hungary because they despised the movement to build the land and did not take part in it. May the merciful one protect us from such opinion. Notice how stubborn they are. One should not argue at all with people like these. The young men agreed with that elder Chassid. Other people agreed with him. They said, stop talking about Eretz Israel. Give us a lecture about Torah, mitzvot. Don't talk about Eretz Israel going to Israel. This is the 30s, 1940s.
But after mitzvot need to be performed in the land.
He says, every argument I presented failed to convince them. They had one answer. The Rebbe is against it. That's it. Rebbe says different. I retorted that although the Rebbe is indeed a great man, the Rebbe of Gur is no less than him. He's a profound genius and holy man, thousands of 10,000s of scholars. He says that the Rebbe of Gur says, that if many God-fearing Jews would come to Israel, they would enhance the sanctity of the land. I also heard that the brilliant Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfelder, said the same thing. But there was the letter itself. He says there had 500,000 Jews come to Israel. 312, I wrote, maybe it's here. Had more the Jews come to Israel, it would have been a religious day. Now they didn't come here. The letters of the Rebbe. This is from the collection of the letters of the Rebbe of Gur. The more Orthodox Jews, this is by 312 in the English edition. The more Orthodox Jews that ascend to Eretz Israel, the greater their influence will be. And this will help preserve the holiness of the land. In this way, Orthodox Judaism influence will grow, and the settlement of the Holy Land will be found in the spirit of our holy written and oral Torah. He says in another place, had 500,000 come, whatever. The Gur was the greatest Hasidu, I think over 1 million Hasidim between the wars, between World War I and World War II. And the Rebbe, he said, had they come, but they didn't come. So I'm saying in 42,000 that came in the Second Temple, they also didn't want to come. We're waiting for, that's what the Rabbi, the Gemara says that in the Yoma, page 9b, that they didn't want to come to Israel. And because of that, the Second Temple was destroyed and didn't last. The Kuzari brings the Kuzari here.
Oh, they're over here.
No, we took there.
Used to be here.
The last
You
shelf.
have the Kuzari?
We do definitely have the kuzari.
There it is.
In the last shelf.
Third shelf down, first column.
In section 2, paragraph 24, it talks about Eretz Yisrael, the beginning here, how important it is, how central it is, Eretz Yisrael, etc., etc. And then he says to him, so why are you here? Why don't you go to Eretz Yisrael? What are you doing here? Like, the Zionists in America. So what are you doing here if you believe all that? So he says, here you've caught me. Here you've caught every answer. He has a question. The whole book is based on the question, the dialogue. Every question has an answer. Here he says, you've got me here. You've humiliated great me, O king. The truth is that this sin of not ascending to the land of Israel is that which precluded the completion of the divine promise concerning the return of the divine presence, the Shekhinah, in the Second Temple. The Second Temple would have had the Shekhinah, the divine, would have been, again, the place of the full God's prophecy. Everything would have returned had the Jews come back, right? There's 5 things that were missing in the Second Temple. The prophecy, the Shekhinah, that's why Christianity developed then. They say, oh, you see, God left you guys. You see, there's no prophecy. There's no the Shekhinah isn't coming back. You don't have all the miracles in the temple. You don't. Why did it not come back? Because of this sin, the Jews didn't come back to Israel. This is because the divine flow was ready and prepared to descend upon us, just as it did before, and we were right. Had everyone been ready, willingly to return to the land. However, only a part of the nation returned to land, right? 42,000, as it says in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. Whereas the majority, including their leaders, remained in Babylon. They chose to remain in exile and to serve the kings of the nations, just to not to leave their homes and businesses. Sound familiar? So it's not only because of the oath, whatever. It's there's a repeating phenomenon of this non-response to come back to this. So we'll talk about this in the despise. It's not a new thing. And there's different reasons given always, like it. But recently, you're right. They spoke about the 3 oaths, so we can't come back. We have to wait. But that's again, the return of the desire not to, or the lack of desire to come back to the land. It was way before that. Like, mainly on the practical level, it was because of the concern. It's a secular movement, and how can we participate with these evildoers? We want it to be a holy land. We're coming back to be the kingdom of priests and holy nation. Why before that? Why was it dominated by the secular day? Why didn't they precede them, like Rav Kalish or Rav Gutmacher in the 1800s? Why didn't they listen to them? That's exactly what we read about before, and we explained all that. why this. Why didn't the Orthodox, the religious, wake up before the second? Why weren't they come and build it and make it what it's supposed to be? But and it's also part of Hashgacha that it comes about this way. It's all divinely. But now I just wanted to do this one. So it's very important, this source. It goes on, though, the Radak, and we'll continue with it next week, because I wanted to add a few more sources about this topic of what you just talked about, the conflict, so to speak, as if the mutually exclusive human participation or hishtadlut, human effort, and divine and reliance on God. You're definitely correct that they're not only not mutually exclusive, but like we see here, that is the way God works. God is the God that works through miracles, but he also works through nature. What the Radak says here, that it's from Hashem, but he brings it about through man. I send you the boats and the helicopters and Balfour, and I send all these things that bring about. Who brought that about? Herzl and Ben-Gurion. This whole phenomenon of the Jews coming back, rebuilding the land after 2,000 years, this new spirit of life, this new success, the land drying up the swamps, and doing all these things until today. What's going on? The amazing success and the victories. So who did all that? No, I'm waiting for God. So who's behind all this? Who's doing all this? It's not the joke, isn't the woman in the flood. It's not a joke. Who did all this? It's millions of Jews in Israel now. The success, the center of human history, what's going on. If you have articles, New York Times, the focus on Israel. Like, what is this? That's all men do. I'm waiting for God. It's unbelievable, but that's how people think. And we have to understand and respect that, where that's coming from. That's why we explained it. But now we're getting to the positive side. What the proper perspective of Torah that teaches you that you have to do all that you can do. In the English, how does it go in English? God helps those who help themselves. But the Ramban says that. The Ramban, rabbis way before I don't know who else said that, but that you have to do all that you can do, all that is humanly possible, and then God's help will be forthcoming. That the whole book here, the Emeli Smecha, brings down source after source after source that explains, and it tries to, relating to what? To the issue of the coming back to Israel. Because again, just to finish quickly, there was one that I told to Rav Kook that we say in the Birkat HaMazon, Harachaman, God will bring us back to Israel. So how do you support the Jews coming back? It says God will bring us back. He says it also says in Birkat HaMazon that God will support you, like God give you livelihood. So sit back and do nothing. No, you understand, they make a livelihood. Everyone does, right? They go to work, they do, and they believe that God helps them, whatever. But they go to work and they do all that is necessary to get their bread on the table. But when it comes to the national issue, it says God will bring you back. God will do it for you. It's the same thing. But why? So why is this distinction on the individual level? Everyone knows that you have to do. It's not a new thing here. The idea that God helps those who help themselves. That you have to do all that you can, and then God's help will be forthcoming. So why on the national level? That's what we went into explain. That on the national level, the collective didn't exist for 2,000 years. On that level, we said that is only up to God. Only God can do that. That was not in our hands, and indeed, it wasn't in our hands for 2,000 years. The problem is that when it does become possible, we still have this learn and helplessness. We're still waiting that, no, God will do it. But it's, again, everyone knows Judaism is you have to do all that you can do. It doesn't just come out of the air. You have to do all that you can do. But on the national level, you have to be aware. On the collective level, and here he's talking about the collective level again, that God works also in the same way, that he works through human effort, just like he did in the temple, the coming back from Babel. And so too in the future, that the redemption will come about through the nations, that God will awaken them up, arouse their spirit to bring the Jews to come back to Israel. That I want to bring you a few more sources from Chazal. Next week, B'ezrat Hashem.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. Sorry. Yeah.
This 6-day war was a miracle?
Every war we thought was a miracle.
So I told you, the Ramban says everything is a miracle. David says everything is natural. No, what is it? No, the opposite. So I'm saying it depends how you define. There's revealed miracles and there's hidden miracles.
I'll show you just so you know for next time. It's three things. You hit the X, hit OK, wait a couple seconds, and then